So in this part of the lecture, we want to create what is called the Cornell-Box. The Cornell-Box is a test scene to determine the accuracy of a render engine by comparing the actual render image with an actual photograph of the same scene. So what you've done back in 1984, well, which was done by Cornell University, which kind of invented the name for the Cornell-Box, was to actually build this kind of scene with a simple light bulb and some cardboard and some painted walls, and then take the photograph of that and then compare this to your render engine. This was used to, well, as I said, determine the accuracy of a render engine. And nowadays it's not really used anymore to compare your render engine to a real photograph, as most major render engines now have reached photorealism anyway. But still, I think it's a little good exercise to get started in Cinema 4D. And it's also good because we actually have a look here at the whole approach in the 3D scene. So we will start with some modeling. We will place some objects in the scene. Then we will add some light. We will color the walls by using materials. And then at the end, we will render our first basic image. And we will only take a brief look into different kind of topics here. So the idea is more to give you an overall overview of how to approach a 3D scene in Cinema 4D with Corona Renderer. And then later on we get into the more detailed parts of the different aspects of modeling and rendering and materials, etc. So for this, I advise that you have installed the Corona Renderer and of course have Cinema 4D installed. You might want to check out also the video about changing the layout of your Cinema 4D program, but otherwise this can be done pretty without any further knowledge of Cinema 4D. Okay, so let's switch to Cinema 4D, and we'd actually like to just start with that simple scene. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we create a cube. You find the cube over here on the right side with a little cube icon, and then the first thing we like to check is the measurements of that cube. Now keep in mind, it's always a good idea to work with real measurements. So if you want to build a room which is 2 meters high, you should also use a measurement of 2 meters in Cinema 4D. In most cases it doesn't really matter too much, but when it comes to light calculations, it's definitely a good advice to keep the measurements to real sizes. So because if I would do a room which is only like 2 centimeters high, light would kind of behave a little differently. So yeah, keep the sizes to real world sizes, and then you will run into trouble with some kind of the rendering stuff. So for this cube, I think 2 by 2 meters is fine. This would be a little bit larger probably than the model of this kind of thing, but let's approach it as a real room, and then 2 by 2 meters is actually a good starting point. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to get rid of one of these walls because we actually want to get inside of the cube. Now, to do this, and we again only tackle some of the things only on a very broad overview level here, but this cube, what we now see is what is called a parametric object. This means we have some attributes down here, some parameters which we can change, but we cannot change a lot more than that. So what we have to do is we have to make this object into something else, and we want to make that into polygon objects. And to do this, you have to click on this little icon with the pen inside, and as you see, as soon as I click this, the icon of the cube changes, and now the cube is a polygon object. With a polygon object, I don't have the parameters anymore. I can't change the size of the cube as simple as before, but I now have the possibility to change the mode of Cinema 4D. And this is a really crucial thing to keep in mind, or to learn and to understand, that we can change every object into this kind of polygon form. I mean, not every object, but most of the objects. Now, if you have a look over here on the top, you see we have this object mode, and left to this we have the polygon mode. With the polygon mode and some of the tools on the left side here selected, I can select different polygons or surfaces of my object, And with the edge mode, I can select edges, and with the point mode, I can select points of my object. Now, a simple thing we can do, make sure you have, for example, the selection tool selected and the surface mode, and then you can do a right click on one of the faces, and then you see a new menu, and we want to go to a specific operator down here, and you find this under clone, and it is called split. Now, what split will do, it will actually make a copy of this single surface and add this to our object hierarchy. Now, if you go back to the cube, you see that the cube itself still has this kind of surface on the front. Now, what you can do now is you can just hit the backspace or delete button on your keyboard, and then you will get rid of it. Now, this is of course still a closed cube because we made a copy of this surface, but now we have like, if I select all at this point here, you see we have one cube, which is only the back of this cube, and then we have this cube 1, which is only the flat surface of this cube. Now, we can rename this, for example, call that surface or whatever you like, and the other part would be the cube. Now, a good thing to talk about here maybe is also this kind of traffic light option menu. So if I want to get rid of this surface without deleting it, but I don't want to see it anymore, I can click on this upper traffic light here. The first thing which will happen is it will get green, and then afterwards it will get red. And as soon as this is red, you won't see it anymore. Now, why are there 2 traffic lights for each object? The top one is just for the editor view, so this is the thing you see here in the middle, and the other one is for your render view. So if I like to hide it in my editor, but I still want to render it later on, I just can keep that off here or turn it green and turn that, like this. So now I would only see it in the rendering and not in the editor, but you can also turn it the other way around. I could make it like this, and now I would see it, like this. They're a little small. Now again, like this, sorry. Now you would see it, not see it in the rendering, but only see it in the editor. But for now we want to hide it, and if it's turned off, it basically just means that it's visible. Okay, so now we got our little cube here. Okay, the next thing we need is some objects in this kind of cube. So if we take a look back at the reference image, you see we have some spheres and we have some cubes in there. So let's start with the cubes. And again, this is pretty straightforward. We can just use the parametric cube again. And now what we like to do, we want to go back to the object mode, and then you will see those small yellow things. And now we can just scale this down to the size we want to. So there's no definite correct size here, so you can just go ahead and create something as you prefer. And then another one, and move this down. So what I did there is I hold down the command key, and by holding down the command key and dragging one of the objects, you actually make a copy of the object. You could also go to your object manager and do a command or control C and command or control V for making a copy over here. All right. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add a sphere like this. You see it's pretty big. We can come down here to the attributes and change the radius maybe to something like 30. It's still a little big, so let's go down to 20. And then I use this in between corner thingy to move this around. If you use one of those, it will actually move in 2 directions. So for example, if I use the blue one, it will move in the X and in the Y direction. And if I use the green one, it will only move in the X or the Z direction. So this is quite handy if you want to place something on your objects. There are some different methods to place objects. We will come to this in a separate video. For now, we like to keep it simple. All right. So 2 spheres placed. Now, if you want to get rid of this kind of grid here in the middle and it annoys you like it does to me, then you can go here to filter, work plane, turn that off, and then you will get rid of this kind of grid and have a little bit of a better view on your scene. All right, nice. So we got a scene here. We have a few cubes, the spheres. We have basically our room ready and set. What we're still missing is some light. We miss some materials, and basically we also miss a camera to capture our scene, but more on that in a second. Now, if we have a closer look at our spheres, you see they're kind of ugly still. They're not really round. So what we can do there is you select your spheres, and you can select both at the same time, and then you see this kind of segments down here, and the segments basically define the amount of detail of this sphere, or the edginess, or whatever you like to call it. So if you bump that up to, let's say, 64, you will get a nice smooth sphere. And if we have a look at the cubes over here, you see they have really hard edges. So this is something which would be not possible in the real life, or it would be razor sharp. So here again, we can come to our cubes, the parametric ones. They're not converted to an editable polygon object yet, and that is very important because we still have the parameters down here, and there's an option which you can activate that is called fillet. And with the fillet you can create those kind of rounded edges. Now I don't want it to be that round, so we can just decrease the radius, maybe turn it down to something like 0.5 centimeters, and then you see we already get a little bit of a nicer look and feel to those cubes. All right, the next thing we want to do, we want to introduce a light, because without the light we would actually not see much in our rendering, or it would look pretty dull. Now if you followed the video of how to change your layout, you will maybe have the Corona icons right here already at hand. If not, you can of course still use the Corona menu on top. Now again, just as a reminder, because we're using the Corona render engine, now everything which has to do with the rendering, this means materials and also lighting and also the camera and the rendering itself, of course, we want to keep that in the space of Corona, or we want to use Corona objects for that. So this is why for the light now we go to Corona light and create this kind of light here. Now you see the light, it shines in the Z direction towards our wall, so we can just rotate that by 90 degrees, and if you hold your shift key down you will do the rotation in 5-degree steps and not in free flow form. Okay, so let's add that to the top. Maybe switch back to Keynote and see how that looks like size-wise. So yeah, I think that's fine. So now we have a size of 50 by 50 centimeters. All right, so what's next? Materials. We still have a just plain white room. So let's open the material manager by clicking this icon over here. And let's introduce a couple of materials. So again, we want to stay in the Corona realm here and use the Corona materials. The standard Corona material is the physical material, and we can just add that to our scene and the new material will appear. Now for the walls, we want actually to use a white material. So we can just keep it as it is and put that on our cube material. You see there's not much which has changed because the material beforehand was also white, but this will make a difference because now Cinema 4D knows that this surface is a Corona material and it will render a little bit differently. If we open the material and you do a double click on that and we go to the base layer, which is the kind of most important area of all materials, you see we have a certain roughness value and we have a certain color value. I would say this again when we talk about materials, but you don't want to push your material color to 100% white and maybe don't even to 90%. There's a little bug here in my cinema that this kind of thing won't respond. So you want to keep it in the area of something between 70 or 80%. So nothing in nature is basically that wide that it would go beyond that. But this is just a little side note here. Okay, now we can basically copy those materials maybe 2 times. Just hold down the Command or Control key again. And let's be disciplined here and call our materials some names. So this would be white, this could be red, and then the other one would be the green wall. Now we keep it simple, just open your material, go to the base layer, and then we change the color to red in this case, and you see we now got a red material, and in this case we want to have a green material. And in the original Cornell scene, I think we went with pure values here, so why we don't switch to the RGB tab over here by hitting on the R key. And we want to have 0 for the red and 255 for the green and 0 for the blue, and then we get like this perfect green color. And let's hop back to the red one and do the same here. So 255 for red, 0 for green, and 0 for blue. Again, we have this like perfect red material. Now going back to the original material here, you see we have a chrome sphere and a glass sphere, so we need another 2 materials, and let's just use the white one for this, and this would be the glass material. And now a pretty handy trick for the Corona renderer would be that you can go to the general tab over here and then apply a preset. And for glass, we just select glass and we say yes, override my material, that's fine, and then we get a glass material. Pretty simple. And then again, we go copy the white material, we call that chrome, and then we go to the preset thing again and select chrome, yes, override, and then we get this kind of chrome material. Now, how do we apply the materials to our object? It's pretty simple. We can just use drag and drop. So for the chrome, I just drag and drop that on the one sphere, for the glass on the other one. And then now it gets a little bit more complicated. For our cube, we want to go back to the polygon mode. Remember, that's the button over here. The button, not the bottom, the button over here. And you want to select those 2 faces, or basically just the one face you would like to color. So on the left side goes the red, and on the left side, no, on the left side goes red, on the right side goes green. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the coloring of this thing. We forgot the different objects over here. So let's go white on the cube, and as you can see, you can also drag and drop the materials right here in your object hierarchy. So we're still missing the surface. We come to this in a second, and this seems that we're pretty much ready to go to render this kind of scene. Just a quick recap. So we did some very simple modeling by dissecting the cube and making it open so that we can see inside. And then we added some other objects to our scene. So we did some scene building. We did some lighting by adding the Corona light to our scene. And we created some materials and applied the materials to our objects. So this pretty much a lot of things you do also in bigger scenes, only that it's a bit more like a little bit more work to make more complex scenes, but the overall process is pretty much the same. Okay, so while we skip the camera part for now and just throw up the renderer here, and let's see if we get some results. Now, before you do that, one thing we always keep or should check is that we go to the render settings, and then for the renderer, make sure you select the Corona renderer. Otherwise, Cinema 4D wouldn't know that you like to render with Corona and would do some stupid things. So now with that done, we can start the interactive renderer in this kind of virtual frame buffer, is it what that is called. So this little thing here, the Corona VFB, is the virtual frame buffer, and it's used to render your images or to display your render images rather. You have two options. If you hold your mouse on the on the renderer button over here, you can start the interactive one, or you can just render the usual standard render. And the interactive one is great if you want to kind of see what is changing in your scene. So now you see it's still black. Why it is still black? Maybe think about that for a second. Why is our scene completely black? Now, let's have a check. We have a corona light, which is shining, which is inside our cube, and we have the different objects. And if we come now down to the surface, you see the surface front here. We hid it, but we didn't hide it in the render view. So if I hide that now, you can see that we start to get an image over here. Now the light is still missing on the top, so we actually have some light in the scene, but we don't see light, the light source itself. So let's check. Maybe it's just too much in the roof here. Yeah, that was the problem. So you see, if it was just like in between this kind of plane over here, it was somehow there but somehow not. So we just have to move it a little bit more to the down side here. And there you go. There you have your first kind of render scene. Now, I don't want to make this video too long, but let's check out just a few little things over here in the virtual frame buffer at first. Now, what you can see here over the post tab is you can do some post-production on this kind of image. So for example, what you can do is you can activate plume and glare, and as you can see immediately you get this kind of plume and glare effect on the light source. So a plume effect is basically just the overexposure of light sources or of light which is exceptionally bright in your scene. And then we have the tone mapping. The tone mapping is a tool, something like color correction, but you can do actually a little bit more with it. You can, for example, also use presets. And there is a preset I like particularly, which is the photographic filmic, and it kind of emulates how a real film would respond to light. And there's some error here because there is a LUT file missing. Just ignore that for now. I have to check out why that is missing. But yeah, other things you can do here is you can decrease the exposure. Let me deactivate that for a second so that the render, the error message is not showing up too much. So for example, if I would go to -1, you see it gets a lot darker. If I would go to +1, it maybe is a bit overexposed. And then we have white balance. So this is basically simple, usual photographic kind of values you can change and use. You can also sharpen or blur your image, and you can also denoise it. But there's a caveat to this, because you cannot denoise if you use the interactive rendering, and you have to set something up in the render engine. So if you can't click on this, this is totally normal. Just ignore it for now. You don't need the denoising for now. This should render rather fast in your case. Now, the last thing which we might want to set up is actually a camera to get this kind of perfect angular view in the room. And for that, we add the camera object from Corona. And with this, some important thing is that you see this kind of viewfinder icon over here. So this is kind of icon which you see in digital or analog cameras when you look through the viewfinder. And actually, this is the same thing. So if you click on this, you will actually go in the viewfinder of your camera. And then if you move the camera around, you move the camera by that. So if I click this icon again, then it will turn gray again, and you will see our actual camera in the scene. Now if I click it again, you will see it animates back into the viewfinder of the camera, and then I can position the camera. Now if you haven't moved your cube around and it's still in the original position, then we can just go to the coordinates of our camera and just reset this to 0, 0, 0 kind of thing. So we want to actually have it like this in the center. Now our cube was oriented to this kind of side, so let's make sure we rotate this by 90 degrees. Again, hold the shift key on your keyboard to make this 5% steps, and then we just want to move this back a little bit. Now you see, if I go back into the camera, we have this kind of darkened bars on the top and on the bottom. This is because the render resolution we have set up is not square, but it's 16:9, and what we kind of see here is the area which will be rendered, and the area which is behind the dark bars over here won't be rendered. So if you want to change to a rectangular 1:1 frame, you can go to the render settings over here, select the output tab, and then, for example, just change the height value to the same as the width value. And now we can just move the camera by using the X value over here on the X-axis and move it a little bit closer so that we will capture the whole room and the whole frame. Well, that's pretty much it. Now you might ask, why did I keep the surface? I could have just deleted this kind of front face of the cube. What we can actually do is to render this cube as like a closed box, so that the light wouldn't come out of this cube. We could use what is called a tag, and this will be the last thing for this kind of session. A tag is something which you see here on the back. So you can attach tags to your objects, and tags will manipulate your objects even more. So they're pretty useful to do all different kind of stuff with your objects. And a particular tag for Corona is the Corona compositing tag, and you will find this by doing right click, go to Corona, and then select this. You might probably won't read this because it's cut off by the screen capture tool, but it is called Corona compositing, and the Corona compositing tag can be used to do different things. For example, we can say that this object shouldn't be seen by the camera. So I can just turn this kind of traffic light back to its default and just say deactivate this kind of seen by camera thing. And now if I go back to my virtual frame buffer and start to render this again, I have to scale it down a little bit. You see we can get the same result more or less, but now it actually renders it as if this kind of thing is closed. And let's do a quick check here. So this is, I can't zoom out here, but this is how it would look like when this front face is closed, and you can also see it in the reflection. So this is definitely a part where this will be noticeable. So now if I would just hide this again in the renderer, and for now we can keep this object then, because it's just kind of not visible for the renderer. You kind of see how that changes the scene. So now we get this black reflection, and let's have another look at the scene itself. You see the scene brightens up. That is because the light now bounces from this front face back into the room and eliminates it even more. So as you can see, there's quite a difference in the appearance of that rendered scene, and this is just an example of how you can actually do things which are not possible in real life. So if you would build that Cornell-Box in real life, you wouldn't be able to kind of completely take a picture of that inside this Cornell-Box without seeing the real camera or the lens or whatever. So yeah, 3D programs are quite nice because you can do things which are not usually possible in the real life. Okay, that's it for the Cornell-Box. This is a good starting point to build your own kind of scenes, and yeah, try to build that by your own and by not following this video, so at least once, so that you kind of get the hang of it. Okay, see you in the next video.